So the tagline of the Film Honor Diaries was that culture is no excuse for abuse.
Totally.
And I will say that time and again. Culture is no excuse for abuse. What we have to do in all these cases, whether we are fighting anti-Semitism or radicalization or Islamization or, women's issues, we have to keep human rights at the helm. The main thing is that
Yes,
all
yes.
these are human rights aberrations. Hate is actually a human rights abuse. Many people, they think, hate is just an ideological term. No, it isn't. It's human rights abuse. And so we have to fight this using human rights as the helm, as the check bar of it. It's not about religion or culture or nationality. It's about human rights. If anyone's human rights are being abused, it is our moral and ethical duty to speak out, or at least it is mine.
Hello, everyone. This is another episode of Golda's Girls, and today our special guest is Raheel Raza. Before I go there, my name is Carla van Walsum, and my co-host for today is Raheel Raza. And the guest we have today is so interesting. She is a Muslim woman who has many occupations. Among others, she is an opponent of Islamic terrorism and Islamism, and also fighting Jew hatred. What a wonderful combination. This will be an extraordinary conversation, and please stay put. Welcome, Raheel.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be here.
Likewise.
Okay, Raheel Raza has appeared in print and on TV and radio numerous times on CNN, Fox News, Real Time with Bill Maher, and BBC Hard Talk. In 2017, she gave over 100 interviews internationally and published over a dozen op-eds. She advocates for women's rights and gender equality and seeks to educate youth about the dangers of radicalization and terrorism. Thank you for joining us today, Raheel. It's a pleasure and honor to have you here.
My pleasure.
So also I want to mention that in 2018, you were awarded the Medal of Courage by the Simon Wiesenthal Center in California. And that's just one of many of the other awards that you received. So we're grateful, very grateful for all your efforts.
Thank you.
So I want to start with, you live in Canada, in Toronto, and are very aware of the huge anti-Semitism problem there. So I want to ask you, why is Canada the nucleus of anti-Semitism now? And why is it important for the Muslims to be leading the fight against anti-Semitism?
So that's an excellent question. Thank you. I live in Canada and we're very concerned because Canada is the epicenter of anti-Semitism today. And according to one statistic, there has been a 611% rise in anti-Semitic incidents, hate, and violence right here in Canada. I need to explain to you that anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism, anti-Semitism are all various forms of Jew hatred, and they are connected directly to radical Islamism. Islamism is political Islam. Islam, the faith that I follow, is the spiritual path. So there is a difference. My battle for the last 3 decades, and along with the people that I work with, has been to battle Islamism, because Islamism in radicalization is what leads to anti-Semitism, and radicalization and Islamism are alive and well in Canada. In Canada, as we say, we call them Islamists, those who follow political Islam. They have penetrated into all 3 political parties, and so politically we are a mess. They also have a group called the Muslim Vote, in which they tell Muslims who to vote for or who not to vote for. And I think it may be important for your for your listeners to understand that the the reason that this is happening in Canada is because Canada has always been a safe haven for extremists of all stripes, not just the Islamists, others as well, because our law enforcement and our leaders are very soft on calling out the Islamists. So the Islamists have, they've been smiling all the way to the bank, and they're here along with the IRGC, which, as you know, is a critical situation right now.
Yeah. Wow. So you are born in Pakistan, and
Yes.
that's important too. You grew up there. You studied there. What made you go to come to Canada?
So my background story is that I was born in Pakistan in a culture where women were supposed to be seen and not heard. And I think I was born an advocate, an activist. I didn't know what to call it at that time. And I was rebellious against the inequities that I saw. I always felt the pain of human rights issues, whether it was gender inequality, which I experienced myself because it was a very patriarchal culture, economic and social inequity, but it was difficult as a Muslim woman to speak out. I was very lucky to have unconventional Muslim men around me. My father, who was a feminist, and he told me, you can do whatever you want to do. He took me to libraries where I first read The Diary of Anne Frank. I must have been about 10 years old. And then I read Exodus. And although I had never met or heard about anyone from Israel or Israel itself, it was never mentioned, the seeds of inquiry were sown. And I was curious, who are these people? And so, grew up, left Pakistan because in the late 1970s, Pakistan was overcome with Islamism and fundamentalism due to one of our presidents by the name of General Ziaul Haq. So he brought in Sharia law. I grew up in schools that were co-education. Suddenly, they were separated. And, the stress of the fundamentalism was on women. So I was lucky. I met my husband, who was as much of an activist as I am, and we pushed back against the status quo, and we decided that we could not live there because, we were too outspoken to be there politically. So we left. We went to Dubai for 8 years. But even there, you couldn't really speak out. I was writing there very regularly, but as long as you didn't talk about religion, politics, or the royal family, which were where all the problems were, it was okay. And so we came to Canada in 1987. And that was like a breath of fresh air for me. All of a sudden, I realized what it meant to be free. I realized what it meant to have a voice. And I wanted to use that voice because as we were living in Canada, I was seeing that the same ideology that we left behind was creeping up in Canada.
Yeah.
And so I had a full-time job, but I became a full-time activist and I started speaking out. But it was only in 1988 that we took our first trip to Israel. And that was an opening of the eyes as it's unbelievable. Everything that I had ever heard, anything, all the stories that we had heard were proven to be untrue. And they say you should be careful what you want, because when I went to pray at the mosque in Jerusalem, I prayed that I would come back. And so I went back every year for 13 years.
Wow.
until COVID. Yes,
We could have
yes.
met you in the street there.
Well, I tell you, when the 13th time I went, the immigration officer asked me, he smiled and said, "So where's your Israeli passport?" He said, "There are many Jewish people in North America who haven't been here as many times as you have." Initially, I was invited to go and speak at the conference that was hosted by the late Shimon Peres called Facing Tomorrow. And then after that ended, after 6 years, I went back and spoke at the ICCT. I made presentations. I spoke at the Knesset. It just happened that I was invited to speak because, as you said, they had not heard a Muslim voice speaking out in favor of the right of Israel to exist and speaking out against anti-Semitism, because that is when it started dinging that there was something very wrong in the global, view of Israel. During the years that I was an activist, I was accredited with the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. So
Wow.
for 6 years, I went there regularly, thrice a year. And I kept noticing time and again that anything that basically from the tsunami to sex lies and videotape, everything was blamed on Israel.
Right.
Everything, human rights violations. And the countries there, which were part of the OIC, which is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, 53 Muslim countries at that time, some of them were the ones who had the worst human rights record, like Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, especially towards women. They said, we have no human rights violations. It's only USA and Israel. And I kept waiting for someone from Israel to respond to them, to retaliate, and it didn't happen, because I'm sure they knew that, the United Nations was ineffectual. But I stood up and started speaking out. And of course, it wasn't appreciated, but because I am a Muslim and because I was there, I was able to express my opinion. And I think during those 13 years that I went to Israel, I kept looking for the issues that Israel was being blamed, apartheid, discrimination. I never saw it. I kept looking for that, and I never saw it. And I knew that this was all lies.
Yeah.
So it was a natural fit for me, along with my other activism, which was very focused on women's rights, that I took on the cause of Israel and anti-Semitism.
Wow, that is so powerful. That's like amazing. And you speak about your anti-Islamism, right? And Islamic terror. Are you yourself also in the Sufi movement? Is that what you're as a spiritual?
I'm very inspired by the Sufi
Yeah.
movement. I believe I am a Sufi at heart because spirituality is my Islamic path. That is what I imbibe. I truly, if I didn't do Sufi meditation, I think I'd go nuts, because the work I do is so toxic. And the pushback I get is so toxic.
Yeah.
As I had mentioned to you earlier, I am the proud recipient of a death threat, of fatwas, of hate mail, a couple of lawsuits. So I have to keep sane, and the spirituality of Sufism keeps me grounded and sane.
I can so imagine that, and I got that thought listening to you. So I was thinking before, to be critically about speaking about Islam, whatever it is risky, right? And I have followed for years Qasim Hafiz, who came from, and you must know him, and also
Yes, I do.
the Imam of Peace, Imam Tawhidi. And he says you cannot ever reform Islam. What is your take on that? What is your hope for the future that you would like to see changed in the Muslim world?
So the first thing I would like to clarify is that my critique is against Islamism, which is political Islam.
Yeah.
I'm an observant Muslim. I don't have any issue with the faith that I practice.
Mhm.
What I have an issue is with the way people understand it, interpret it, and practice it in their everyday life. They've they've hijacked the spiritual message of my faith and turned it into a cult, and in many cases into a violent cult. And so I am violently opposed to Islamism, to violence being used in the name of my faith. And I am actually one of the founders of the Muslim Reform Movement. That was something that was created about 10 years ago. You may have heard the name Dr. Zudi Jasser.
Yeah.
He is a great Muslim reformer, I would say. And so with him and some other very enlightened people, we set up the Muslim Reform Movement. And the idea is that we can reform the way in which Muslims, as I said, interpret, understand, and practice the faith. Every faith has been through a reform. Judaism has been through a reform. To some extent, Christianity went through a reform. We don't, unfortunately, have a Martin Luther King to guide us, but we can definitely look at issues and talk about how to reform the understanding of Islam. Because if it is being if our holy book, the Quran, is being misinterpreted and misused to brainwash young people into thinking that they can strap a bomb around themselves and kill themselves and other people, and they will go to heaven and, get 72 virgins, which is, some sick man's dream, which is not a fact.
And believe. That's what I can never believe.
And believe.
They believe
yes.
it.
Yeah, because how nice that would be for them. They're all frustrated sexually. And so, so what I'm saying is that these are such irrelevant and sad issues. But unfortunately, instead of really following the spiritual path, which in Islam, many people don't know, is so similar to Judaism. I call Islam Judaism light, because Judaism was the first Abrahamic faith, and Islam took a lot from Judaism. And then, it was represented to an Arab community and to take into consideration the practices and culture of that time. But there is so much, there are so many more similarities than there are differences, if only people would read. And if only they would understand. And by the way, when we are talking about anti-Semitism or Israel and its right to exist, in the Quran, it very clearly says this, and I actually read it many times, that the Bani Israel is the word that's used, that the children of Israel are the rightful owners of that land. And Moses is telling them that this is your land and you have to protect it in every way that you can. So I don't understand why majority of Muslims don't read that, understand it. This is God saying that this is the land of the people.
Yeah.
And also the Quran tells us that unless you respect and understand the people who went before you, which is the Jews and the Christians, you can't really be a good Muslim. So Islamism has really polluted the spiritual message of our faith. And they misuse verses from the Quran, especially to masses who are illiterate, who just absorb whatever is being told to them. And unfortunately, there aren't enough people speaking out because they're afraid. Speaking out comes at a price, and not everyone has the support that I have. I mean, I'm so fortunate. My father, my husband, and my sons have stood as bodyguards at the door when I was speaking. They all have supported me, and I'm very fortunate because this support has allowed, and along with the support from the community, mostly the Jewish community, the respect and love they have given me has been more than anything I have ever received. And so I'm very humble about it, but it also, propels me to keep on speaking out.
Wow, so that is amazing. What do you think is needed, or what is your vision of what can be done that Muslims get a better understanding in the way you speak, but also people in the Western world? I think most people have never read the Quran. I did. I had Muslim friends in the Netherlands. I wanted to know more. Most people have ideas. What do you think what is your future vision in that?
So in my organization called the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow. So I have two organizations, the Council of Muslims Facing Tomorrow, and I stole the term facing tomorrow from the conference that I used to go to in Jerusalem. The one that was hosted by Shimon Peres, because I love the term facing tomorrow. It's so important for Muslims to face tomorrow and live, in the world today as it is, instead of constantly living in the 7th century. So Muslims Facing Tomorrow, we work with the Muslim communities. We are not ex-Muslims. We have not alienated ourselves. We have very good connections with the Muslim communities. And we do a lot of work with them through presentations, through panels, through writing, invite them into our home, despite the fact that my husband has a book on the IDF and Israel right on our coffee table in our living room, which creates a lot of conversation. And communication is the key. We are not having enough conversations. Most communities are sort of ghettoized amongst themselves. And that does not help. We need to have respectful dialogue. Because obviously, when you look at what is happening in the world today, we've lost the battle. But we must not lose the war. And the war is a war of ideologies. It's not a war of weapons. Right after 9/11, when I wrote my book, Their Jihad, Not My Jihad, my main message in that was that this is a war of ideologies. The ideology has to change, and how will that happen? In Muslims Facing Tomorrow, we use the 3 E's. We say expose the problem, educate the masses, and then empower for change from within. So certain amount of the change in terms of how we reform our understanding of the Holy Book and the faith has to come from within us. And that's what the reform part is. And then the other part, the education part, is to make sure that we get the message out, because our youth especially is at risk of being radicalized, because the extremists, the jihadists, the radicals use billions of dollars in which to brainwash our youth. And that is what is a very dangerous trajectory. And we've seen this in Canada. I don't know if you remember, there was a time when there were 17 youth who were charged with conspiring to behead Stephen Harper. And, the fact that they were youth, it was very frightening and concerning. It's about the conversations around the dining table. It's about how parents are teaching their children at home. What are they teaching them? Are they teaching them tolerance, respect, peace, and love, or are they teaching them hate? And unfortunately, many school curriculums, especially in the Middle East, even here, teach hate.
Yeah.
And when you hate, you dehumanize the other. And then a violent reaction to them sort of becomes normalized over a period of time.
I remember reading a number of years ago in Toronto, a Muslim family, I believe they were from Pakistan, if I'm not mistaken, had 2 beautiful daughters, maybe 18 and 22, something like that. And they did an honor killing with the mother's blessing, and the brothers got involved with the father because the girls wanted to be wearing makeup and going on dates and being more westernized.
Yes, you're absolutely right. That was a really huge case. It was a huge tragedy because it wasn't just the 2 daughters. There was an aunt as well who was involved because she was supporting those girls. Now, I'm glad you brought this up, because I was part of a documentary called Honor Diaries about 10 years ago. And that documentary was about honor killings, female genital mutilation, and forced and underage marriage. 3 issues, very, very prominent, not only in Muslim majority countries, but surprisingly across the Western world. People were shocked to know the statistics and numbers of honor killings that take place in the Western world. And I have been directly involved in this. I was invited to Sweden some years ago, because in the immigrant communities there, honor killings is the norm, and the government tends to lump it together with domestic violence and doesn't do much about it.
Yeah.
So I went and gave testimony to their government, to their parliament, to say that honor killing needs to be under an entirely separate code, because they are premeditated murder. It's
Right.
not domestic
Totally,
violence. This
totally.
is premeditated murder. And it is happening along with female genital mutilation, which is on the rise again. Apparently, there are millions of cases in the United States. It is happening across the board in Europe, in the United Kingdom. It was very, very, the statistics were very high. And we lobbied for a long time for the Canadian government to make it a criminal offense. Now, in the United States, thanks to Ayaan Hirsi Ali and her foundation, there are some states that have criminalized not only female genital mutilation, but those who are facilitating it. And they do it under the table. These are midwives and doctors who don't really report. And this is happening to underage girls, children. And in some cases, they take them back to their home country, for example, Somalia, and they have the FGM performed on them there forcefully, and then they bring them back. It causes so much pain for them. Their future is ruined for these girls, giving birth, having sex. Many of them die because it's being done with unsterilized instruments. So these are issues that are sort of on the back burner, because you'll understand that women's issues are always on the back burner. And it's up to us as women, as voices for those who are voiceless, as being the speakers for those who can't speak, to bring these issues to the forefront. And I do that. We help and facilitate so many women in third world countries, show their films, support them financially, get them out of Afghanistan, settle them in places. I mean, this is a 24/7 ongoing advocacy that I'm involved in. And I'm really proud, because these are my sisters, my daughters, my mothers. How can we look the other way? When the Me Too movement started, I asked them the question, are you speaking out about honor killings? Are you speaking out about these issues? No, these are taboo because of political correctness and because of the woke culture, especially in Canada. A person who is not of that culture is not even allowed to criticize or speak out. Why? Because these women's lives are not as important as other women.
Yeah.
So you see, we come across a lot of barriers in the work that we do, and we are constantly trying to break those boundaries and barriers.
It is so interesting that you say that. In my early 20s, I read the book of Nawal El Saadawi, the first Egyptian female doctor that, the female genital mutilation criticized and ended in prison. And I was shocked about the book and the content. And in college, I was, right? I spoke to many of my friends who were mostly on the left, I would say, idealistic. They didn't care. There was no interest for it. There was like, it is like that's what they do and they're used to it, so they don't know any better. And my answer is, well, a kid that is violated or molested doesn't know any better, but doesn't mean it's happy. That logic is missing. And to my actually, I feel it like I feel terrible about that today there is so much like political correctness that people don't dare to stand out and say something. I am in the same position, because if I say that, oh, you're Jewish, no, that violence is never permitted. But I see in the West that they have, and I mean Europe and America, I don't know so much about Canada, there is a big mouth, are big opinions, and they know better, but then I don't think anybody deepened themselves really in it, just a few people. It's so
You're
terrible.
absolutely right. So the tagline of the film Honor Diaries was that culture is no excuse for abuse.
Totally.
And I will say that time and again. Culture is no excuse for abuse. What we have to do in all these cases, whether we are fighting anti-Semitism or radicalization or Islamization or, women's issues, we have to keep human rights at the helm. The main thing is that all these are human rights aberrations. Hate is actually a human rights abuse. many people, they think, hate is just an ideological term. No, it isn't. It's human rights abuse. And so we have to fight this using human rights as the helm, as the check bar of it. It's not about religion or culture or nationality. It's about human rights. If anyone's human rights are being abused, it is our moral and ethical duty to speak out, or at least it is mine. I couldn't sleep at night if I thought that I had not said something or done something or written something to expose the problem. Sometimes, because of government regulations and policy, we are not able to bring about the change that we need. But, every drop in the ocean does make a difference.
Yeah.
And so I have to keep on at it until the change comes. Maybe not in my lifetime, maybe for the next generation. But I'm doing this for my children and grandchildren to have a better future.
Isn't the problem a lot related to Sharia law?
Yes, it is. It is. And so many people don't understand that Sharia law is not divine. And of course, all this is in my book as well. They have been brainwashed into thinking that, this was God-given. No, Sharia law was put into place about 200 years after the message of Islam. And it was basically anti-women. And it was implemented by the rulers of that time to justify what they were doing. And so, the word Sharia, when it is used in the Quran, means moral and ethical guidance, which we all need. But to implement it as Sharia law, which is, as I said, is primarily against women, these were just created as the rulers right after the death of the Prophet got more power. So I say it is a combination of politics, power, and patriarchy. And that is what has led to these very anti-women laws. And we have to be able to expose them. People are afraid to speak out because, you had mentioned this, that you would be afraid to speak out as non-Muslim women because you would be labeled with Islamophobia.
Oh, yeah.
And unfortunately in Canada, we have this problem. We have got the Islamophobia czar, and the government supports this whole Islamophobia rhetoric. But Islamophobia is a term that was created after 9/11 to stop any conversation and discussion about Islam and Muslims. And so it is, they try to accuse me of being, in fact, they have accused me of being Islamophobic, which I love. I said, would you like to be a fly on the wall to see that, I'm a practicing Muslim, I'm an observant Muslim. How dare you call me an Islamophobe? But these are labels thrown out, and they terrify the ordinary Canadian because Canadians by nature are peace-loving people. They don't like conflict, and, it's only recently that conflict has come into the country. But I've always said that, there is a fine line in between being naive and, being nice. And it's time to stop being nice because, I can't fight all your battles for you. So you have to speak out. And this is why it's so important that everybody speak out. It's so important to have allies in this battle against anti-Semitism, especially, which is on the rise in Canada. It's not a Jewish issue. It's a global virus. And, when people were doing research on diseases like cancer, it wasn't just that they were doing it for one community. This is global. Similarly, anti-Semitism is global. And, there is that cliche that what starts with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews. And so we have to be afraid. We have to be very afraid. And we need a counter narrative that will defeat the voices of the extremists and the victim-mongers who prey on Muslim youth before they become extremists. And there are very few think tanks in Canada, if any, that actually create a safe space where we can have these discussions. And there need to be discussions between diverse communities, because trust me, every community is facing its own share of extremists and, a level of fundamentalism. However, with Islamism, it's wrapped in a cloak of religiosity, which is very, very heavily funded. And so, we are really up against a brick wall unless we come together and speak as one voice. And we are trying very hard to do that.
How is that going to? Because what I learned, and I'm not sure if you agree with that, that it is kind of a sign of disrespect to have questions like to teachers, and and that keeps you maybe back to openly come with comments, right? That you want to think critically and allow maybe your kids to think and speak critically. What do you think about that? What can be done in addition with this?
First of all, that this concept that in places of education you can't ask questions is something that has been created, and it has been created through foreign funding for Islamist organizations in educational institutions, in universities, colleges, and schools. And we have not kept a strict eye on the kind of funding that has been coming in. I mean, obviously, foreign funding, especially if it comes from countries which are members of which support the Muslim Brotherhood agenda, that kind of funding definitely must be questioned. And an educational institution is a place where the students must be forced to think and to critique and to ask questions. But, now in the Toronto District School Board in Toronto, they have a policy called the APR, which is anti-Palestinian racism. They have implemented that, which means that there can be no questioning about anything to do with the Palestinian cause. And this has been the Islamophobia booklet, and this has gone totally across the board into all organizations and institutions, so that now people are afraid to speak out. So yes, that dialogue, that questioning has been totally stifled. And this is the success of the Islamists. This is the success of the jihadists. As I said this 20 years ago, that if we don't speak up, if we don't speak out, this is what's going to happen. And it's a terrible feeling to say, I told you so. My book, Their Jihad, Not My Jihad, I feel like republishing it under the title, I Told You So. Literally, everything in it was a warning. And everything that I had warned about has happened. So I don't know when Canadians will wake up. And God forbid it should happen that there is a violent attack here, which I don't want to happen. But what stops them from actually creating? There is a very strong presence of jihadist groups right here in Canada, coming from diverse backgrounds. And the Islamists have billions in funding to fuel their agenda. They do it through social media. They do it through PR tricks, the games they play. And, the Islamist propaganda and hold in Canada is so strong, that it's so lethal, that while Jewish speakers and films about October 7th are resisted with mass rallies and slogans, pro-Hamas propaganda is allowed to take place freely on the streets and in educational institutions. I've been there. I've seen it since October 7th. It has been non-stop. And law enforcement say that we can't do anything until a violent act occurs. Yeah. Hello? It's inviting.
It's really a shame because, well, I think a big problem that Canada has is the political correctness issue.
Yes.
And I was watching when Ezra Levant, the journalist from Rebel News in Canada, when he was in Toronto and he just wanted to record what was going on with a pro-Palestine march. He was arrested for doing nothing, absolutely nothing. He was arrested. And it just, it drives me nuts because it's so wrong. So you have these people who are advocating for genocide, and they're okay. But the guy who wants to stand there and tape it and report it gets arrested. And
poor guy. He and his journalists are constantly being arrested. But you know what? Bless them. They get out of it. They thank God they have good lawyers. They keep coming back. They are really fighting because, except for alternate media, there really isn't any place where you can get the real news. As you know, billions are being funded into getting out the fake news, and people don't really, there's people who just gather their news from listening. They don't read enough to know what is really happening. I mean, they don't even know the history and background of Israel and Palestine. They don't know that there were 4 opportunities for Palestinians to make peace, and they walked out of it. They don't know that before Israel left Gaza, how much they did in terms of setting it up. So because they're ignorant, and I believe that ignorance leads to hate as well, because we are all ignorant to a great extent, but ignorance of this, and based on this, and with the success of the Islamist movement and their funding, the Islamists have normalized anti-Semitism. That is a given. Right. It's very late in time to be talking about anti-Semitism because they have normalized it. Now they have a new terminology which they use across the board, the extreme left and, the radicals and those who are funding them. It's colonization, genocide, and apartheid. And so you've got left-leaning Canadians along with Canadian unions. They support them. Yeah. And so, how many different levels of a battleground are we fighting in? And thankfully, there are organizations like the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, which is our organization. We work closely with Secure Canada, which works towards the security and safety of Canada. We work with Clarity Coalition, which is a group of diverse activists, religious, non-religious, every different kind of person. And, our main focus is to uphold Western values, to bring back democracy, and to fight against radicalization and free ourselves from the clutches of those who are supporting them and of the violence that they are creating.
I just wanted to mention, I finished reading your book the other day, Their Jihad, Not My Jihad. And you mentioned that there were warnings that you give in your book right after 9/11. Can you talk a little bit about those warnings?
Yes, so this all started with Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, and I made it. That was the time when I tried to create the clarity for ordinary, for North Americans or Westerners, I would say, non-Muslims, to understand the difference between Islam and Islamism, and for them to understand that I, as a Muslim woman, was fighting for the cause because from within the faith, this was really important. I wrote "Wake Up and Smell the Yemeni Coffee" when it was happening with, the Houthis in Yemen. I spoke about political correctness and how it is stifling conversation. And that is the most important thing. If we don't talk to each other, how will we understand what the real problem is? There is not a single group where, at least Muslims and Jews, who are extremely ghettoized at this moment, who are extremely divided, especially after October 7th, where do they sit and have a conversation which is not about blaming each other, but about talking about what their issues are? So we are trying to create that kind of a safe space by maybe trying to bring youth together to cook for peace. My younger son is a chef. And so along with Daniel Corrin, who heads the Allied Voices for Israel and works with a lot of youth, we said, listen, let's bring some youth together, let them cook together. We'll call them Cooking Cousins, Cooking for Peace. So we want to keep on trying to create all that. My book, Their Jihad, Not My Jihad, was, of course, after 9/11, and then 7/7 happened. But what is happening today is much more toxic, because today we are fighting against government policies that are not allowing us to speak out. And that is where the problem is, because we can talk till the cows come home, but unless policy changes, unless law enforcement is more on the strict side in terms of arresting people, in terms of jailing people. The problem is that the radicals and the pro-Hamas supporters on the streets of Toronto are not afraid of anything because they consider this to be within their rights. But when was hate speech a right in Canada?
Yeah.
So this, and they say, policy is hard to change, but it's not impossible. We're living by the laws and policies that were implemented in Canada maybe 50 years ago. Look at where Canada is today. And unless we make some real serious effort to bring in our elected leaders, except for a few of them, the others lean towards the other side. We're very fortunate that we have Melissa Lantzman and we have a few others who, especially in terms of Israel, this is where the real matter comes to the surface. I tell people, especially in the Muslim community, you don't have to like Israel. You don't have to like Jews, but don't hate them either. And you have to accept. So here's my test of checking out an Islamist. And people ask me, so how do you know you meet a Muslim? What is their ideology? I said, there is a litmus test. You ask them 3 basic questions. What is their attitude about women? Do women and men have equal rights in the mosque or outside? What is their attitude towards the LGBTQ community, whatever goes after it? In Iran, they say take them to the top of the highest building and throw them down. In other words, kill them. Is that what you believe? Or are they part of our human rights and community and should have equal rights? And the third most important question is, do you believe in the right of Israel to exist and defend itself?
Wow.
That's all.
Powerful.
You'll know right away.
Do you get many positive answers?
Not maybe for all of them, but you see, then again, using the words is one thing, but actually implying, they'll say, oh, yes. So, there are many imams of many mosques who say, oh, yes, we believe in women's rights. Islam gave women's rights and all. I know that. But are you giving women equal space in the mosque? That's the question. And because of that, I actually had to lead mixed gender prayers for Muslims, which became the biggest scandal of the century. But it was only to show that we do have spiritually equal rights. The first mosque of Islam, the mosque of Prophet Muhammad, was not a place for men only. Men, women, children, families went there.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if women are on one side or men are on one side, but they're putting the women in the basement where they can't see the imam, they can't hear the imam. So, the Islamists are very clever. They will use the right terminology. They'll say, they'll write op-eds or the games they play. Every now and then they'll post an op-ed, for example, on honor killings and say, oh, we're against it, but they won't do anything about it. This is to throw a curveball. They'll try to show they're upholders of human rights. In interfaith meetings, they'll use the right words. They'll say, we support the Jewish community and we'll stand around the synagogue to protect them. But are they going out in the street and supporting the Jewish community while they're getting abused, while they're being, their shops are targeted, their businesses are targeted? I did. I went to the restaurants that had been targeted to show our support and took a letter, stood in front of Indigo on main downtown Front Street because Heather Reisman, who owns Indigo, had been targeted. The windows had been painted. So you have to put your money where your mouth is. You have to practice what you preach. And that, unfortunately, they're preaching a lot. But in practice, they're failing.
I have to ask you a question. This is something I wanted to ask a Muslim person for the longest time. So
you found that Muslim person.
Sorry?
Yes. I said you found that person.
Yes. I found the perfect person. So according to the Quran, section 855, I think that's how you call it, it says, Allah hates disbelievers. It says, and I quote, indeed, the worst of living creatures in the sight of Allah are those who have disbelieved, end quote. So if that's what the Quran says, wouldn't that contribute to hatred towards Jews and Christians?
No, Jews and Christians are believers. So let me first backtrack a second.
Okay.
The Quran is considered by Muslims to be a divine message from God to Prophet Muhammad. It was an oral message. It was many years later that it was compiled into written form. And that was a human effort.
Yeah.
There are many, if you were to take 4 Qurans with an English translation and read them, you would find a very different translation and interpretation in each one of them. That is our internal Muslim problem because the Quran is not in chronological order. The Quran has, I'm giving you a condensed, quick version, is the Quran has 2 kinds of messages. One are universal about, be good, do good, and so on. And the rest are specific to that time and place. And many of the translations and interpretations have been tainted, so to speak, to suit the ideology of the person who's doing the translation. It's a human effort. So when I was talking to you a while ago about the reform, that is part of the work that we need to do. And to understand also that there are certain ideas in the Quran that were for the 7th century, that were for that time and place. They need to be parked in the 7th century parking lot. For example, armed jihad was a concept that did exist in the 7th century. Why? Because these were tribal communities. The only way they knew how to deal with each other was through tribal warfare. If the camel of one tribe went into the other, they came out with the swords to kill the other person. There was no United Nations. There was no discussion. So for that time, perhaps it was all right. But today, we have communities and nation states, and we don't need armed jihad. So what we are suggesting is park that concept in the 7th century parking lot, as many of the other faith communities have done. Everything is not valid today as it was then. The issue of women at that time, women were not working, they were not educated, so they said, okay, they need 2 women to give testimony as opposed to 1 man. Why? Because a woman could be coerced into saying the wrong thing. So to support her, it's not that 2 women are equal to 1 man. It's the understanding and interpretation. And I have to confess that now, in my senior age, I'm reading actually for the first time a Quran in chronological order, and it makes so much sense. And it's written by a Sufi, so it is a Sufi interpretation.
Yeah.
And so it's different, and we can't take everything literally. There are many, many underlying messages. The Sufis say that you have to read it 3 or 4 times and understand the history of the time to truly comprehend what the message is. And if we believe as believers that God is, we say Rahman and Rahim, merciful and benevolent, why would there be anything in the Quran that says, you can be cruel to women or to human beings? No. It is the positive messages towards Jews and Christians are far more. That Moses is mentioned so many times in the Quran. As I said, the Israelis are mentioned, and Jesus is mentioned more times in the Quran than Muhammad himself. And we are told that you have to respect these communities. In particular times in the 7th century, if there was a battle between, let's say, the Muslims and the Jews, maybe the Jews got a bad rap because that's what it was. It was a battle. But what they're doing now, what Hamas did on October 7th was totally against anything. It's not just religion. It's about human rights. They violated basic human rights. They attacked and they murdered and they raped and they kidnapped. Where in the world is that accepted? But it is, right? The global community has sat back and said, this is okay.
Even worse, that Israel did it themselves.
Yeah.
Well, among all the propaganda.
Yeah.
But the problem is that it was a horrible terroristic attack. And not enough people in the world spoke out. Not enough leaders in the world spoke out. And this, unfortunately, has been Israel's and the situation with the Jews from the time of the Pharaoh till now. Time and time again, they are blamed for everything. They're conspiracy theories. They're condemned. I believe that you have to go to Israel to really understand what Israel and Judaism is all about. And so we hope one day, as part of our future planning, to take a group of Muslims, let them see for themselves. A member of our organization, a journalist, went last month and he wrote a glowing article about how he was totally amazed as a Muslim to go there
Oh,
and see.
that is
See.
great. That is great news.
That's how
Yes, and I always write, every time I would come back from Israel, people got tired of me writing about why I love Israel so much, but I do, because it is the truth. And the truth is hard to swallow for many people.
That's how Qasim Hafiz changed his mindset by actually going to Israel. Rawan Osman, the Syrian
Yes,
Muslim.
I met her. Yes,
Yeah,
Amazing.
also great.
it is important. It is very important for the allies
With your own
to take a trip and see for themselves, to see
Right.
that, you can hear the call to prayer in Jerusalem or in the streets, which you can't in any Western country. So, where is the apartheid? Where is the colonization? You see in Israel people from so many diverse backgrounds who hear those language. I am absolutely enamored by the country and the people. So what can I say?
That's so nice. So, how do you see the future, like in Europe, for instance, like in England? People say England is already lost, right? So many
I
Sharia
believe so,
courts.
yes.
But how do you see how
Yeah.
that could
Well,
change?
we, at least for North America, there is still a chance. I've written and I've said that look at Europe, look at UK. We don't want to become that country, that community. So wake up and smell the coffee and do something. And on a positive note, there are now more and more organizations and individuals, some of whose names I had mentioned. And we're working together to bring about change. In America, they're lobbying the new government. In Canada, we're trying to lobby our newly elected prime minister. Not an easy task because he hasn't reached out to us yet. Hopefully he will. He keeps going to the wrong people. He went to the organization that had said on Canada Day, FU Canada. And he told them that Islamic values are Canadian values, not the values of this organization, I would say. But we welcome him to visit us or call us to visit him. And that's where the hope lies. I couldn't do this work if I wasn't an eternal optimist. I am an optimist. And I believe that we will continue to rally together. And together we will bring about change.
That is such a beautiful last sentence of this wonderful interview. Thank you. And we always end with it's hard to say the favorite. We always end with our anti-Semite or Jew hatred or groups of the week in a way. So, Rachel, can you please start?
Yes, I picked the Ayatollah Khomeini, supreme leader of Iran, because that's what's going on right now, who has said death to America, the big Satan, death to Israel, the little Satan. And he's had many opportunities to come to the table and negotiate with President Trump and has refused to do so. And we all know what happened as a result of that. So I picked him.
Okay. What about you, Raheel?
So I'll start on a positive note. My hero first
No, so if you don't mind, we do that at the end because otherwise we end with the negativity.
Okay. So yes. So I won't name an individual, but I do know that the Palestinian Youth Movement is an organization that has actually put forth this idea of genocide and apartheid and, all the colonization. And they are very, very anti-Semitic. So I would say they are top of the anti-Semite list.
Yeah, that is really sad. Well, I have as an example for today is an enemy we have within, and that is a professor, an Iraqi-born Jew, Israeli that lives in England, is also involved in Oxford. His name is Avi Shaim, and he says a lot of things. He's very critical about Israel, and he is everywhere invited. He has a very nice way of speaking that comes across beautifully. But the anti-Semitism he creates, basically speaking, if you read the comments, it's undoable. So he is not doing any justice. He only creates like some more self-hating Jews too, if you can give them this name today. It's so terrible. It's like, why do you always have to put your opinion on the table if it creates more hate? That doesn't make any sense. That does not make any sense. So I'm very upset with this man. So that's why I chose him today. Now we go to the heroes, the nice end. Rachel.
Okay, well, I chose a little group because they're all part of the same team. So President Trump, Bibi Netanyahu, the Israeli soldiers, and the Israeli intelligence, because it took a lot of courage, a lot of bravery, tremendous amount of intelligence to do what they have done in Iran now, and hopefully it will bring about a better situation in terms of Iran having a nuclear weapon and threatening the West and Israel.
Yeah, thank you. Raheel.
Oh, my hero always has been, always will be Irvin Kotler.
Yes.
He is absolutely brilliant. It's sad that he's on dialysis now. I've met him many times and he's always appreciated the work that I do, but he is my hero because a major part of his life he has spent fighting anti-Semitism and promoting the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. And this is globally, internationally. He is recognized all over the world as being a really sound and respected voice for Israel and against anti-Semitism and hatred. I hope to be like him one day.
Yeah, that is amazing. Amazing.
His
Actually,
daughter, I think his daughter is also following him in his footsteps.
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. Honestly, I changed my hero because part of it, Rachel said something, but I honestly want to say that you, Raheel, are my hero for today because of the enormous positive influx that you have given and a message of hope in a way. And that really gives me myself hope too, because it is a very burdening feeling being European, now American, and in a way Israeli, to see what's going. So I really am happy that I found you and that you were speaking today, and your message is fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, both of you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this wonderful interview. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
We have a small request, and you probably know what it is about. But we have this very interesting situation that 91% of our returning viewers do not subscribe, but they are returning, so they must like it. And that would be great if that is you, if you will be so kind to subscribe, eventually leave a like if you like the video, or even leave a comment, that's even nicer, or have a request. That would be great to hear from you. But please support our work by subscribing. Thank you so very much. That would be such a favor to us.